It began like a cruel joke, but it changed everything. A group of bikers burst out laughing when one of them sneered, lifted his boot, and kicked a German shepherd straight in the chest, the loyal companion of a young boy who had lost one arm. The laughter stopped instantly. The boy screamed, but no one there knew that the dog they had just attacked wasn't an ordinary pet. He was a retired K-9 officer, trained to protect, to serve, and to never back down. In the next few seconds, everything spun out of control. That cruel joke would soon turn into a life-changing lesson, and by the end of that day, the loudest man in that group would be on his knees, begging for forgiveness. What happened next left everyone stunned. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm really curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The town of Helena, Montana, shimmered under a pale spring sun, streets washed in soft gold. Dust lifted from the roadside each time a breeze passed, dancing in the light like lazy fireflies. The air smelled faintly of lilacs and gasoline, that strange blend of sweetness and steel that only small American towns ever truly carry. It was the kind of afternoon that looked harmless from the outside, the kind that made you forget that cruelty often hides behind laughter. On Benton Avenue, Samuel Cole, 8 years old, rolled his wheelchair slowly along the cracked pavement. His left hand pushed against the rim, his right replaced by a wooden arm, smooth, worn, carved years ago by his father before leaving for a war he never returned from. The edges of the wood had faded now, polished by time and tears. A few people passing by gave small nods or smiles. Everyone in town knew the boy and his dog. Walking beside him was Max, a sable German shepherd with silver threading his coat and a long, faint scar tracing his muzzle. His gait was steady, each step quiet and measured, like a soldier still marching long after the war was done. His ears twitched at every sound. A door closing, a horn far away, the sigh of wind through the trees. But what he heard next made him stop. The low growl of motorcycle engines came rolling from the distance, rough, throaty, uneven. Samuel turned his head. Down the street, 5 black bikes rounded the corner, sunlight flashing off chrome, their riders laughing too loudly for a peaceful town. They moved like a storm that didn't belong here. Max's tail froze, his head lowered slightly, body stiffening into the stance of something ancient and trained. Samuel noticed it right away. "Easy, boy," he whispered, voice small against the roar of engines. "It's just noise." But Max didn't believe him. The motorcycles came to a stop in front of Harrison's cafe, the same place where Samuel's mother was inside buying cocoa. The leader, a tall man with a gray-streaked beard and smoke-stained grin, swung his leg off the bike. His jacket creaked, his boots hit the ground hard. His name was Duke, and he carried himself like someone who'd learned to mistake fear for respect. He looked at the boy and the dog, at the wooden arm, at the scarred muzzle, and something in his face shifted. Not pity, not kindness, just curiosity laced with cruelty. "Well, would you look at that?" he muttered, smirking. His buddies laughed behind him, voices bouncing off the glass of the cafe windows. Samuel tried to move forward, but his wheels caught in a crack in the pavement. Max stood firmly between him and the men, his chest low, eyes locked. Duke's grin widened. "Relax, kid. We're just saying hi." No one in town liked trouble, and people inside the cafe pretended not to see. One man looked up, then down again. The hum of conversation faltered, but no one came out. Duke took a step closer, smoke curling from the corner of his mouth. "That's a fine dog you got there," he said, voice dripping mockery. "What's he do? Fetch your wheels when they roll off." The others burst into cruel laughter. Samuel froze, cheeks burning, eyes flicking to Max. The dog didn't growl at first, just stood there, still as stone, gaze burning with something deeper than anger. But when one of the bikers spat near Samuel's wheel, a sound broke loose from Max's chest. Low, controlled, dangerous. The laughter stuttered. Duke's grin faltered, then twisted into something darker. He flicked his cigarette away, the ember scattering across the concrete. "Got some attitude, huh?" he said, stepping closer. "Think you're tough, mutt?" Max didn't move. His ears tilted forward, paws planted firm. Samuel's voice trembled. "Please, don't—" But the words were cut short. In one cruel, careless motion, Duke lifted his boot and kicked. The sound cracked through the afternoon, leather slamming against bone, sharp and sickening. Max's body staggered backward, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. A gasp broke from inside the cafe. A woman screamed. Samuel's breath hitched into silence. Time fractured. Dust hung in the air, sunlight freezing mid-beam. Max lay still for a moment, stunned, air leaving his lungs in a choked whimper. Samuel's wooden fingers clenched around the armrest until they creaked. His eyes filled, wide and disbelieving. Duke chuckled once, stepping back, his shadow long and black across the boy's lap. Guess he's not so tough after all. But the smile never reached his eyes, because Max was already rising, slowly, deliberately. His chest lifted, fur bristling along his spine. His eyes, once warm, now burned amber, locked on Duke with the calm precision of a soldier remembering his purpose. The crowd behind the cafe windows stood frozen. Even the bikers went quiet. Samuel whispered his name. "Max." And in that trembling moment, as the last of the laughter died in the air, something shifted. Something no one there would ever forget. The peace was gone. The lesson had begun. The noise faded almost instantly after the blow. Only the sound of Max's uneven breathing filled the air, shallow, controlled, but steady enough to silence even the most cruel among the bikers. Dust lifted in the sunlight, where his body had fallen. His chest rose once, sharply, then again, slower this time, like a drumbeat finding rhythm after chaos. The crowd at the cafe terrace stood frozen behind the glass, cups half raised, their reflections trembling in the window's glare. Then Max stood. His legs trembled for a moment, then straightened, solid, deliberate. The scar along his muzzle caught the light, turning into a line of steel across his face. His gaze locked on Duke, not with rage, but with the heavy stillness of judgment. That silence was worse than any growl. It made even the wind hesitate, as though the world itself was watching to see what he would do next. Duke's crooked grin faltered. He had expected fury, a lunge, blood. What he saw instead was restraint, cold and unyielding. Behind him, one of his gang muttered, "Man, that dog's freaking trained!" But Duke didn't answer. His jaw clenched, eyes darting briefly toward Samuel, who sat trembling in his chair, gripping the wooden arm as if it were the last real thing in a world gone unreal. Samuel's voice came, soft and broken. "It's okay, Max." The boy's eyes were wet, his lip quivering. But Max didn't move toward him. His body remained still, muscles coiled beneath his fur, every nerve waiting, not for comfort, but for direction. Deep inside him, something ancient stirred. Years of service buried beneath the quiet life of a companion now woke, slow and deliberate. The air around him changed. The dog was no longer just a pet. He was memory, discipline, and duty in motion. At a corner table near the cafe window sat Raymond Cole, a man whose silence spoke louder than most voices ever could. 62 years old, his frame was tall but worn by time, his shoulders square though one leaned subtly on a weathered walnut cane. His face, lined with sun and war, carried the calm of someone who had seen too much and learned to speak little. He wore a faded brown jacket over a flannel shirt, the kind veterans kept for decades, and his silver hair caught the sun like frost on old pine. When the kick landed, Raymond's hand had paused midway to his coffee cup. Now he set it down gently, his eyes narrowing. He knew violence, its sound, its smell, the rhythm of it. But this was different. The cruelty didn't shock him. What did was the control that followed. Max didn't retaliate. He recalibrated. Every breath, every step, every fraction of a movement spoke the language of command, a dialect only soldiers knew. Inside Raymond, recognition stirred, not in the mind, but somewhere deeper, older. His gaze softened, then sharpened again as he rose, one slow movement at a time, his cane tapping once against the wooden floor before he stepped out onto the street. The sun hit his eyes, and the brightness carved lines into his face like marks of memory. He could hear the faint tremor in Samuel's breath, the whisper of fear that always came before courage. Max stood motionless, tail still, body poised at the invisible line between obedience and instinct. Raymond stopped a few paces away, his voice low and steady, carrying the kind of authority that never needed to be raised. Easy. The single word was quiet, but something in its tone rippled through the air like a remembered song. Max's ears twitched. His head turned slightly. Not all the way, just enough to acknowledge the voice. Recognition flickered there, the faint trace of something long buried. Training, command, brotherhood. Raymond saw it immediately, the kind of understanding that only passed between men and beasts who had once stood on the same side of danger. The onlookers murmured from behind the glass, sensing the shift. Duke stepped back, pretending it was casual, but his fingers curled at his sides. "What are you doing, old man?" he sneered, his voice louder than it needed to be. But even he could feel the weight of what was happening, that invisible thread connecting the veteran and the dog, cutting through noise, arrogance, and time. Raymond didn't answer. He didn't need to. He kept his eyes on Max, calm, deliberate, patient. The shepherd's breathing slowed, chest rising in rhythm with the man's. The chaos that had filled the street just minutes before now felt fragile, almost reverent. Samuel looked up, uncertain. The boy's tears still clung to his lashes, catching the sunlight in trembling drops. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt it. That strange quiet before action, like the air before a storm. Max's muscles eased, but his eyes stayed sharp. His ears flicked once more, precise, attuned, waiting. Somewhere deep inside, he remembered the last man whose voice he'd once obeyed. The same tone, the same command. It wasn't Duke's shouting or Samuel's pleading that held him still. It was something familiar in Raymond's calm, something that whispered, "You are not alone, soldier." Raymond stepped closer, the cane clicking softly on the pavement. The two locked eyes, one weathered by war, one scarred by service. And in that silent recognition, something passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. Max's ears lifted higher, his gaze sharpened, body tilting forward ever so slightly. Every instinct told him he was once again awaiting orders, the kind only a man who once wore a badge could give. The street went still. The cafe fell silent. Even Duke stopped smirking. The next move belonged to the past, and the past had just come back to life. The air trembled, thick with tension. People had begun to gather along the curb, drawn by something they didn't yet understand. The kind of silence that carries more power than noise. Phones hovered in shaking hands, screens glinting under the late afternoon sun. The world was holding its breath between outrage and awe. And there, at the center of it all, stood an old man, a scarred dog, and a boy in a wheelchair who looked as if he'd just seen heaven and hell meet halfway. Duke shifted his weight, forcing a smirk, pretending control. "What's the matter, old man? You think you can order that mutt around?" His voice cracked slightly, a tremor hidden beneath arrogance. But Raymond didn't answer. His eyes were steady, the same kind that once faced fire without blinking. He leaned slightly on his cane, the sunlight cutting a hard line across his face. Then, softly, so soft the sound almost disappeared in the wind, he spoke a single word. "Sit." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The tone was clean, sharp, carrying the weight of countless commands once given and obeyed without question. And Max, the battle-worn shepherd, responded as if time had folded back on itself. His muscles eased, his chest lifted, and he lowered himself with precision, his back straight, his head high, not as an animal bowing to a man, but as a soldier answering a call he had longed to hear again. The obedience struck harder than any bark or snarl could. The street, once filled with murmurs and rustling, went utterly still. The only sound was the faint hum of an idling motorcycle and the soft exhale of wind brushing past the flags above the storefront. People stared, some with mouths open, some with eyes wide, as though witnessing something sacred. A few lowered their phones, ashamed of having tried to capture what they should have simply felt. Duke's grin faltered. He looked around, waiting for laughter that didn't come. "It's just a dog," he muttered, his voice thinner now, like air leaking from a tire. "Just a damn dog." Raymond turned toward him, slow and deliberate. The lines on his face seemed to deepen, carved not by age but by memory. His eyes, gray and sharp, locked onto Duke with a steadiness that could have split stone. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried like thunder. "He's what men like us used to believe in." The words struck Duke harder than any punch could. They lingered in the air, heavy and true. Some of the onlookers shifted, uncomfortable, as though something inside them had been quietly accused. Raymond didn't move. Max didn't either. Both stood still in perfect symmetry. Man and dog, veteran and canine, united by a silent understanding older than pain. And then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Light, desperate, breaking through the reverence like a cry through prayer. From the open door of the cafe, a woman ran out, her apron still tied, her face streaked with tears that caught the sunlight like glass. Claire Cole, mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled into a messy bun and eyes swollen from sleeplessness, stumbled toward the street. Her breath came in short, broken gasps as she pushed past the crowd. "Samuel!" she cried, kneeling beside her son, her trembling hands hovering just above his shoulders as if afraid to touch him. The crowd shifted again, making way, their curiosity softening into something closer to shame. Claire looked up, and that was when she saw Max. Her eyes widened, her lips parted. She froze. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then, In a voice that cracked under the weight of memory, she whispered, "Daniel." Raymond's head lifted sharply at the name. His pulse stumbled. Daniel. Officer Daniel Cole. The name wasn't just familiar. It was a ghost pulled from the dark corners of his mind. He saw flashes, a cold warehouse gunfire echoing through metal beams, the smell of smoke and gun oil, a badge glinting in the dark, a shepherd barking against the sound of shattering glass, and a man, young, determined, pushing forward to save someone who didn't deserve it. His breath caught in his chest. The dog, the badge. The memory crashed into him like a wave, pulling him backward through years he thought he had sealed away. Max had been there. The same scar across the muzzle, the same unbroken gaze, and Daniel Cole, Samuel's father, had been his partner. Raymond's throat tightened, his grip on the cane firm enough to whiten his knuckles. Around him, the street blurred, the voices dimmed. He could see Claire now through a haze of grief and disbelief, holding her son close, staring at the dog who had once guarded her husband. Duke broke the silence with a scoff, trying to reclaim control. "You all act like this mutt's some kind of legend," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't catch. But his eyes flicked nervously toward Raymond, who hadn't moved. The veteran's gaze shifted slowly toward him, calm, unwavering, carrying years of weight no mockery could dent. His voice came out low, deliberate, but it cut through every layer of noise like steel through fabric. "You just kicked a hero." And the world seemed to stop breathing again. Even Duke felt it. The truth in the tone, the gravity of a sentence that didn't need explanation. A whisper rolled through the crowd, spreading like wind over dry grass. Max sat unmoving beside Raymond, eyes fixed ahead, not seeking pity, not asking for recognition. Only standing guard, as he always had, for the ones who could no longer stand themselves. The sun hung low now, turning the asphalt into bronze. And somewhere, in that fragile stillness, the line between past and present blurred, leaving only reverence and the echo of a command that would never die. For a long breath, no one moved. The world felt suspended in that golden Montana light, until Duke's pride cracked under the silence. Humiliation burned hot across his face, red as the dust beneath his boots. His jaw flexed, his hand twitched, and something ugly rose inside him. That old hunger to prove he still mattered. He stepped forward, voice dripping with spite. "You think that mutt scares me?" Samuel's fingers tightened around the wooden armrest of his wheelchair. Max, sitting beside him, lifted his head, calm, alert, watching every shift in Duke's shoulders. Raymond saw it too. The old instincts in both of them were awake now, not in violence, but in readiness. A line had been crossed, and what came next would define who each man still was. Duke swung his arm in a mocking gesture, aiming just past Samuel's chair. It wasn't a real strike, not yet, but it carried enough threat to make the boy flinch. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Don't." Too late. Max moved, not with rage, but with precision, a motion too fast and too clean for chaos. One powerful leap, one twist in the air, one controlled snap of jaws that found only leather. His teeth clamped down on Duke's jacket sleeve, pulling him off balance and down to the ground in a single fluid movement. No growl, no blood, only discipline sculpted by years of purpose. The sound of Duke hitting the pavement was sharp and final, like the punctuation of justice itself. The crowd erupted in a collective gasp, then froze again. Dust swirled in the fading sunlight. Duke lay flat on his back, eyes wide with shock, his breath ragged. Max stood over him, body low but steady, tail still, gaze unwavering. Every muscle spoke control, not fury. Then Raymond's voice cut through the air, low, steady, absolute. Out! The single word held weight like a command from another lifetime. Max released instantly, stepping back with silent obedience. He padded to Samuel's side and sat again, tail low, eyes calm. His chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, the picture of restraint. The silence broke in waves, first a murmur, then applause. It rolled across the street, hesitant at first, then growing, louder and louder, until the whole block seemed to breathe again. A woman near the cafe clapped with trembling hands. A man beside her nodded, wiping his eyes. And for once, even the ones holding phones lowered them, ashamed to have doubted what they'd just witnessed. Duke pushed himself up, his pride shattered. Dirt clung to his jacket. His mouth opened, then closed again, the words gone before they found air. The crowd's eyes were on him, not with anger, but with something worse. Quiet disappointment. Raymond watched him without hatred. His grip on the cane loosened. Something inside his chest, something long buried under cynicism and years of quiet loss, began to stir. Not triumph, not vengeance. Something cleaner. Pride, yes, but not in victory, in honor. And beneath it, a flicker of faith he hadn't felt in years. He looked at Max, who met his gaze with that same old soldier's steadiness. For a heartbeat, the two were back where time began for both of them, in the dust, in the silence, where duty was never shouted, but lived. Claire knelt beside her son, tears glimmering in her lashes as she whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart." Her hand rested on Samuel's hair, trembling with both fear and relief. Samuel turned toward Max, his small voice breaking through the noise. "Good boy." The shepherd blinked once, almost humbly, as if acknowledging not praise but understanding. The applause softened into murmurs of respect. Someone whispered, "He protected him, without even hurting the guy." Others nodded. In the window reflection, the crowd's faces blurred into one, a town reminded of what decency looked like. Raymond's breath came slow and even now. He straightened slightly, feeling the ache in his knees, the weight of years that suddenly felt lighter. He had seen men break, dogs die, faith wither, and yet here on this ordinary street, redemption had appeared in the shape of fur and loyalty. Then, in the distance, came the sound. Faint at first, then rising, sirens. Blue and red lights began to dance against the pale horizon, washing over brick walls and glass. Justice was coming, rolling in not with vengeance, but with order. Raymond closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the sound settle over him like absolution, and when he opened them again, he saw Max sitting tall beside the boy, calm, ready, unshaken. For the first time in years, the veteran felt the weight of silence not as emptiness, but as peace. The first siren cut through the air like a blade of glass. Moments later, 2 police cruisers slid to a halt, their tires hissing against the asphalt, blue and red light washing across the faces of the gathered crowd. Officers stepped out, one young, one older, their eyes scanning the scene that was already frozen in its own kind of justice. Phones still glimmered in trembling hands, screens recording the aftermath that would soon belong to the world. Duke was the first to speak. His voice, sharp and frantic, cracked through the tension. "That dog attacked me," he shouted, waving his scraped arm as proof. "I was defending myself. Look at this. He's dangerous! His words echoed off the buildings, desperate, hollow, bouncing back toward him like guilt refusing to leave. But the crowd had already seen everything. They'd seen the kick, the restraint, the discipline. They'd seen the difference between cruelty and courage, and they weren't about to let lies rewrite it. A man in a work apron raised his phone. "You might want to check this, officers," he said quietly. One by one, screens lit up. Video after video replayed the scene from different angles. Duke's smirk, the swing of his boot, Max's silent obedience, the measured takedown. No sound was louder than the truth captured in motion. Raymond stepped forward through the parted crowd. The light from the patrol car strobed across his weathered face, casting shadows that spoke of years spent between law and mercy. His cane clicked once against the pavement. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn badge. Edges dulled, surface scratched, the numbers barely legible after decades of life. It wasn't a prop. It was history. He held it up between two fingers, voice low but firm. That shepherd saved more lives than this man's ever respected. For a long second, no one moved. The young officer, dark hair, steady hands, looked at Max, then at Raymond, then at Duke. His jaw set. He gave a small nod. Behind him, the older sergeant, gray hair tucked beneath his cap, exhaled heavily. "Cuffs," he said. The sound was crisp and final. Metal clicked against leather, and Duke's shoulders slumped as the handcuffs locked. He didn't fight. He didn't shout again. His face had gone pale, stripped of its bravado. For a man who lived by noise and spectacle, the silence of consequence was unbearable. The officers led him away, not as a villain from a story, but as a man undone by the truth of his own weakness. The crowd parted to let them through. No one cheered. Respect hung heavier than victory. Samuel watched from his wheelchair, his small hand resting on Max's back, fingers buried in the thick sable fur. The shepherd didn't move, eyes following the patrol cars until they disappeared down the street. Lights fading like a heartbeat slowing to calm. Later that evening, the footage spread. A simple headline traveled faster than any wildfire Montana had ever seen. "Biker kicks dog, instantly regrets it." Within hours, it was everywhere. Television screens, phones, news feeds glowing across kitchen tables. Millions watched the moment Max had moved, the precision of it, the restraint. And in the comment sections below, people wrote things like, "That's what loyalty looks like," or "The old man's voice gave me chills." But in the small cabin where the day had ended, there was no celebration. Raymond sat by the window, the night pressing softly against the glass. The glow from the muted television cast faint blue light across the floorboards. The video played once more, the same frame, the same truth. When it ended, he didn't replay it. He turned off the screen. He looked down at Max, lying beside his boots. The dog's breathing was steady, deep, peaceful. Raymond reached out, resting his weathered hand gently on the shepherd's head. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost reverent. "You remembered who you are." Max's tail brushed once against the floor. A small movement, almost imperceptible but full of understanding. The two sat there in quiet companionship, framed by the hum of distant night sounds. Crickets, wind, a truck passing somewhere far down the road. And yet, somewhere across town, under a flickering fluorescent light, another man watched the same video. Duke sat alone in a holding cell, elbows on his knees, the glow of the small screen painting his face with blue. He watched himself raise his boot, saw Max's eyes, calm, unwavering, and the veteran's voice saying, "You just kicked a hero." For the first time in a long while, Duke didn't feel anger. The fire that once fed him had burned itself out. In its place was something heavier, quieter: shame. He lowered his head into his hands. The sound of the sirens from earlier seemed to echo faintly in his ears, not as warning, but as penance. And in that small silence, maybe, just maybe, redemption began its slow, uncertain crawl. 2 weeks slipped quietly past, the way time often does after storms, not erased, only softened at the edges. The city went back to its rhythm. Cars hummed, storefronts opened, laughter returned to the cafe on Benton Avenue. Yet stories like that don't vanish. They echo, in whispers, in hearts, in the way people pause a little longer before they act. On a pale afternoon washed in spring light, Samuel sat in the park, the wheels of his chair glinting faintly beneath the budding trees. Max trotted ahead, chasing a stick that landed among dandelions, his fur shining a warm bronze under the sun. The boy's laughter rang out, quiet but real, as the shepherd bounded back, tail wagging, eyes bright. Beside them, Raymond sat on a weathered bench, cane laid across his knees, his gaze steady and soft, like a man finally learning how to rest. A breeze carried the scent of grass and pine. The world was calm again. Then came the sound, faint at first, then nearer, the low rumble of a motorcycle engine rolling toward the park. Raymond's head lifted slightly. Max froze mid-step, ears twitching. Even Samuel turned, squinting toward the road. The bike slowed, coughed once, then went still. It was Duke. But there was no black leather this time, no sneer, no swagger. Just a man in a faded denim shirt, jeans scuffed at the knees, helmet in hand, standing uncertainly on the gravel path. The arrogance that once filled his frame had drained away, leaving only weariness and something fragile. Humility, perhaps. His hair was unkempt, his eyes shadowed but clear. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked slightly, untrained for honesty. "I came to apologize." No one replied. The wind answered first, whispering through the grass. Raymond's eyes met his, calm and unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Justice had already been served. What remained now was grace, and that wasn't something a man could demand. Max stepped forward instead, slow, deliberate. The dog stopped just in front of Duke, head tilted, studying him as though weighing the truth in his silence. Then, without hesitation, Max closed the distance, pressing his nose gently against Duke's open hand. The touch was light, not trust reborn, but forgiveness offered. Duke's shoulders trembled. His fingers, once so eager for violence, now moved carefully, resting on the shepherd's head. "I didn't deserve that," he whispered. From behind, Samuel smiled faintly, a quiet understanding shining in his young eyes. "Max already forgave you," he said. His voice carried no bitterness, just a child's simple truth, the kind adults spend a lifetime forgetting. The moment hung there, fragile, golden, as the sun began to lower behind the tall pines. Light spilled across the grass, catching on dust and laughter, on the faint glint of Raymond's old badge hanging from his pocket. Everything shimmered for a heartbeat. The past, the pain, the redemption, blending into something whole. Raymond leaned back slightly, his hand resting on his cane. His chest rose in a slow, deep breath. He watched them, the boy, the dog, the man who had finally learned what it meant to bow without shame. And he felt something loosen inside him. Not victory, not even pride, just release. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from punishment. It comes from understanding, from looking at what's broken and choosing not to turn away. The wind stirred again, rustling through the new leaves overhead. Raymond closed his eyes, letting the sound carry him somewhere quiet. In that hush, a voice seemed to echo through the folds of his memory. His own, yet older, gentler. Heroes don't always wear badges. Some simply walk beside us and remind us what humanity looks like. He opened his eyes. The sun was dipping behind the trees now, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. Samuel laughed softly as Max dropped the stick again at his feet. Duke stood motionless, hands in his pockets, watching the boy and the dog, watching what redemption looked like when words were no longer needed. And for a fleeting, perfect moment, all was right again. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, like a breath in the cold air, like the warmth a hand leaves behind long after it's gone. Maybe because what we just witnessed wasn't about victory or loss, but about the quiet kind of courage that asks for nothing in return. There are hearts that never make the news, men who carry old wounds, dogs who still wait by the door, children who believe in kindness even when the world doesn't. They are the ones who hold this fragile thing called faith together, piece by piece, day by day. Loyalty, mercy, understanding. These aren't grand words until someone lives them, in the stillness, when no one's watching. And when they do, the world shifts, even if only a little. So if you ever find yourself standing in silence, remember, not all heroes wear medals, and not every redemption needs a crowd. Some simply walk beside us, teaching us in their own quiet way how to be human again. And when the wind settles and the world grows still, listen closely. You might just hear them,